Just want to say hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the second of our CISJ events. I'm Fazana Shane. I'm a professor here at Goldsmiths in education, and I have the absolute honour of opening the event this evening as the current head of the Centre for Identities and Social Justice. So the centre was established in 2011 by my colleague, Professor Rosalind George, who's here on the call, and she led the centre until last year. It brings together academic staff, students and non-academic partners who are interested in researching education as a site of social inequalities, but also as a site of possibilities. So we host around 6 external events every year. And I'm absolutely delighted that we're able to bring you this event this evening with the support of Goldsmiths Racial Equality Group. And tonight's event will be chaired by my colleague, Dr Veronica Poku, who is a lecturer here at Goldsmiths in education. And the event arises out of Veronica's own research interests in the Black British experience. Now, before I hand over to Veronica, I just want to say a few words of thanks, if that's okay. So I want to give a huge thanks to our speakers, to Neil, to Eddie and Amelia, for accepting our invitation and coming and being part of this event, and for all the work that they have put in behind the scenes to bring you this session tonight. To Goldsmiths Race Equality Group for co-sponsoring the event, and Stuart Taylor and Michael Hamilton for helping us to bring the event to fruition, and to Professor Rosalind George, who was also involved in the early preparations. Marcus Aitken and Dr. Una Coyne for helping with the publicity and the technical aspects. And last but not least, to Veronica, who's done an enormous amount of work. Just want to say a huge thank you for getting this session on tonight. And I'm going to hand over to Veronica. So thank you.
Okay. Right, brilliant. Thank you very much, Fazana. And hello to everyone, and thank you so much for logging on and wanting to take part in tonight's event. So before I pass over to Eddie, Neil and Amelia, just want you to know that you can use the chat to write in any questions that you would like to have asked at the end, and we'll try obviously to get to them. And if we can't, we'll put in some provisions whereby Amelia will be able to take your questions and be able to respond to them later via email. But I just want to give some additional background to, how this event came about. And basically, it's, it was during what feels like, a lifetime ago, this long ago summer of 2019, when basically my partner took my son and I to another gallery opening. And this was at the 198 Contemporary Arts and Learning Gallery in Relton Road, Brixton, where I'd lived basically for a long, long time before I moved up north London. And basically what we saw there was a curated exhibition of Neil's work called Neil Kenlock, Lost Legacies of the British Black Panthers. And, it was a fantastic day. We really enjoyed it, speaking to people who'd been members of the party and were in effect custodians of that legacy, griots or griots of that time. But one of the things that came to mind for me afterwards, the overriding thought and feeling that I came away with was, why didn't I know about this history? Why didn't I know more about the people that they were talking about, the events that they mentioned? And basically, I wanted to do something about it and, bring Neil's work, his amazing work to a wider audience. So as Fazana said, I have my partner to thank and his friendship, his contact with Michael Hamilton, who's a member of the Ubele initiative, a name I'll put in the chat as well, which was actually established by Yvonne Field, who was a former member of Goldsmiths. And Michael then in turn contacted Neil, who, frankly said, that he'd be happy to come and speak with us. So this is why we're here now. And, as Fazana has said, it gives me great pleasure to be able to present Neil and Amelia in conversation with Eddie to talk. So, you know, with no further ado, as they would say, please, you know, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Oh, lovely. Good evening all, and thank you so much for joining us on this conversation with Mr. Kenlock and Mr. Kenlock's daughter, Amelia. And I wanted to just basically take it back to the beginning for Neil, and to start with the young Neil, the man who would eventually go on to become the Neil Kenlock that we know. But basically, I wanted to sort of get straight to it and sort of like illustrate the point by this really early portrait, I imagine, that Neil took of his mother and father. And I wanted to ask you, Neil, there's a story you told me about watching a program on television about David Bailey, and how you turned to your mother and said, "Mum, I want to be a photographer." And because of that particular program, she understood there and then that you could be a photographer. And she almost gave you the green light to say, "Son, it's yours." And I love the fact that within that conversation probably came this picture. How did you feel about your parental encouragement? Was that important for you?
Yes, it was quite important, but there was shortage of cash, and you know, photography is very expensive. So they used to what my mother said: "Be careful. I'm going to lend you this money, but make sure you bring it back to me." So that sort of stuff that was going on. I said, don't worry, mommy, I'll do it." And then I started to do photography, and then of course I say, well, photography is so important for us, but back in those days, it wasn't that important to people, but to us, to me, it's extremely important. And that's how I take it. I mean, you need to calm down.
No, but there's a truth to that, because, you know, this portrait, for instance, and we're going to look at some of the other portraits that you took. They were just snapshots. They were just moments in time that pretty much at the time no one would have thought much about. But 30, 40 years later, they are so important. They are the chronicle of Black life in Great Britain. And without these negatives and the way they've been preserved and been allowed to be brought back into the public domain, we can now tell these stories. And so I wanted to move on to the next shot, which is a picture of the young Neil Kenlock. Go on.
Eddie, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to, what I was trying to nudge my dad to mention was that he actually wanted to be a painter. So maybe, you know, not many people, you know, in this meeting knew that. He wanted to be a Picasso. He was inspired by Picasso. And funny enough, my grandma, the lovely lady in that picture there, she I think she thought him being a painter, a famous painter like Picasso, was unachievable at the time, you know? So there was something around him being inspired by not just photography at the time or what was happening, but other creative artists. He was very creative as a youngster. And
yeah, of course, I did want to be like Picasso, but when I realized the cost and all that, I thought, oh, no, go back to Brixton.
And that was the attitude at the time for, you know, young people who wanted to, you know, go into the fine arts because, you know, it was perceived as something for others.
I mean, it still applies to this day. There's a system in play with fine arts that isn't in play with photography. But we'll unpack that a little bit more, because I think, as I said, if we move on to the next image and we look at the image of the young Neil Kenlock, and this is a man that would go to a club in Streatham and be refused, Neil. What happened that day?
Well, there's lots of racism was running around, and they had invited people to come to the clubs and so forth. So my friend and I went there, and they said, "Look, we don't want your type here. Go home." I said, "But last week I came and you said we should come back this week." I said, "Look, if you don't go, we're going to call the police." So I told my good friend, said, "Let's walk." So I walked from Streatham Road all the way down to Brixton, and decided that we are going to take action against racism. And of course, we started look at racism. And of course, I didn't know anything about racism and all what was happening there. But this idea that I should come and campaign against it, that's how I become a Black Panther.
Yes.
You know? So
and I just wanted to add to that by saying that by becoming, you know, obviously it's a series of beautiful coincidences. Yes, you were treated with disrespect just for being who you are, and at the same time there is a group growing in Brixton that's looking to turn the tables on this situation. And then at the same time, you're a young man, you've got a camera, and they took you on.
Yes. And yeah, but I mean, I thought it was very, very outrageous that they wouldn't allow me to go into this club. I had the money to pay and to go in, but they refused. So I thought, something is wrong in this country. We need to do something about that. And then, you know, my friend and I, we went and we walked around, and then somebody said, look, we're Panthers. I said, wow, Panthers? What is that? They just come. And then the Panther took us and guaranteed us and took us around. But more important is to show us that things are different from the way the society were treating us. And that was some of the major things that we had. Yeah.
And I just to give you some kind of context of what my dad was like at the time, the type of person. So he, you know, obviously this pivotal moment happened when he was trying to go to a nightclub. So those that don't know my dad socially, he's like the #1 social person. The picture that you're looking at now, at that time, he was someone who would, you know, obviously he grew up in Brixton Hill, Streatham, but then he would often be, you know, in the West End, in central London. He had a network of friends and people that he knew. So to think that there's certain things that are allowed for some people and not for others was a concept that for him, you know, is something he wouldn't really accept, because he felt as if, you know, as long as someone had either skills or they have the right to be somewhere and do something, you know, everybody should be free to do so. He was a very, very social and, you know, person who connected with many people from different walks of life.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, did you want to say?
Yeah.
Just want to say, my father told me, look, I'm going to lend you some money to do whatever you want to do with photography, but whatever happens, you must pay me back. I said, I don't want to hear anything. So that was the sort of you know, situation back in those days that I had to pay. And in a rather, my father said, look, son, I'm going to give you this, that. They said, no, you go work and do that. You know, but it was fun. You know, he did lend me the money, and I did pay him back.
Because cameras obviously were really expensive.
The camera,
at the time.
that was very important. I mean, go ahead.
I was going to say, when we move on to the next picture, because I mean, it makes me think about the social Neil. So when you took this picture, Neil, was this because it's part of your social scene, or was this political? Was this because you wanted to put 3 beautiful Black women on film?
What it was is that they were friends. They're friends of us, and I went there and I saw these ladies with the same sort of length of their dress and all that, looking down. So I said, look, bring all of you. The 3 of you should come here and I'll take a picture of you. And that's what I did. So they now become iconic. They're in magazines and books and what have you.
There's quite with this particular photo, and as my dad mentioned, a lot of his images are taken of friends, people within his social circle, which some of which, as I said, he was super social person. So a lot of his friends became famous.
Bailey, because I think you have a story about Bailey.
So he wants me to tell you that. So these 3 ladies, young ladies at the time, they are called the Bailey sisters. So they are friends of my parents. And what's quite amazing about this photo is that about a year and a half ago, so just to put it in context, my dad's got you know, thousands of images, and there's a portion of them that have been digitalized. So the images that you're seeing today are from the collection that are kind of, you know, been made public because they're in digital format. So what happened was the Penguin, the book publishers, contacted me and asked if they could use this image that they found on the internet, because he's got a lot of pictures that people have shared online because, you know, they're interested in the stories. So Penguin asked if they can use this image for a book that was coming out by an author, which at the time I wasn't aware of. And so I had a chat with my dad, and, you know, he was like, you know, sure. You know, he's got a lot of really good connections with family, well, not family, but friends from Nigeria. So he was like, a Nigerian author, fantastic. He'll, you know, happy to license the image for this particular book. And we do quite a lot of licensing of images. And I was shocked, a year and a half later, I watched the news, and on the news was this image, the same image. I was like, oh my gosh, it's, you know, my dad's image is on TV, on the news, and the book won the actual Booker Prize, which was 2019, I think, yes. And it was, obviously, that's an amazing success for the author, because it's a, you know, a great book. But what it really goes to show is the impact that this image has in telling the story of, or just really kind of giving the kind of visual story of Black women and their journey at that time, and how it can have an impact on us today, you know, how many years later. So it's a, and then, you know, the three sisters, they're still around, and they, you know, one in particular, Beverly, you know, still have a good relationship with my parents, and it's really nice that her picture is kind of gone all around the world now, which is, you know, just remarkable what happens to, you know, these.
And I think it's important to say that, Neil, you are not paid to take these pictures. You are a photographer chronicling your environment, your friends, your people. This is not a job to you. This is just life. But look how many years later, how the testament of photography can prove value in this and how it becomes important. And with that, I wanted to move on to the next slide, which is basically 1977. I mean, you can't zoom in on it, but what struck me is a couple of things. Let me describe to you what it is, because you need to zoom in. I think the bottom half of the contact sheet is essentially the Queen walking around Brixton. Somewhere in there, you'll see like the 5-year-old me waving a flag. But also at the top of the frame is Ansel Wong, who's now the new chair of the BCA. And so it struck me that within a day's work, you'd be photographing Ansel Wong, you'd be photographing people in the community, and voila, there you are photographing the Queen. Did the Queen pictures ever get published? Were you paid for those?
I stepped back a bit on that photograph. It's still there. But I mean,
at the time, when if that was published in, I haven't actually double checked yet if that one was published in. So at the time that this photo, if that was the Queen's photo, that's taken in Win. For those that don't know, the Queen came to Brixton for her Silver Jubilee, and she basically, it was the first time, obviously, that she'd come to Brixton, and she actually awarded some of the local Black community leaders, like Renee Webb, their, you know, their national awards. So it was a very big deal at the time. So because some of my dad's pictures were taken for a newspaper called the West Indian World, which was the big national kind of Caribbean or West Indian newspaper at the time. He did a lot of that as a freelancer. He did it often not being paid much, but you know, so he did it because he wanted to do it. But yeah, so that picture could have been published in the West Indian World. But yeah, so when it comes to
these things, exactly. And I only touched upon it because that's the sort of contact that we have in terms of, I'm a young man, literally probably 4 or 5 years old, waving the flag, being a part of it we've all been. And then, you know, 40 years later, we're having this conversation. But I wanted to sort of keep going with the slides and have a look at some of the work that you did to chronicle some of the individuals that particularly that came into the community. I have to point out something. That license plate is fun.
Jam. Yeah. So this is
a diplomat.
Yes, Arthur Wint.
Oh, he was a diplomat. He came to London.
Yeah, so he so as part of a project that my dad and I did for the Heritage Lottery Fund, this particular, we had a selection of images of Black community leaders that we did some research on. So we actually got some students and volunteers to look in the archives. So some of those archives were from things like documents like West Indian World, some of them were the British Library, and then some were other sources. So when we did the research on this particular photo, we found that this was a gentleman called Arthur Wint, who, if you were from from Jamaica and particularly at that time, he was seen as almost like a national hero because he was the first sprinter. He was similar to Usain Bolt in terms of he did the 100 meters, he was an athlete, and then he progressed into politics and became a diplomat and was the High Commissioner of Jamaica for the UK. So this picture you're seeing is was taken when he came to Brixton to actually meet some of the Caribbean community and the Black community at that time, because you know, that was his role as a High Commissioner. So it was a very exciting moment, and he came, as you can see, with his fancy Mercedes-Benz, probably inspired my dad at the time. But it's obviously like a very exciting moment for those young people in the photo.
Absolutely. And I think it's about the young people in the photo. For me, it's one thing that pose, it's a beautifully composed and very respectful picture of a national leader. But it's the young people behind. It's the guy in the tracksuit leaning against the car. It's reminding ourselves of sort of like the levels of not poverty, but you know, Brixton wasn't, London has changed over the years, and this is a reflection of that. It's a beautiful testament to that. And I think with the next plate as well, we start to sort of look at the fact that Neil's been there in the community, capturing so many leaders, but also capturing the other side of it. He's an insider. This is, you know, Linton Kwesi Johnson wearing a Race Today t-shirt at Carnival, smiling. Now, if you know Linton, I have never seen him smile, ever. And
I make him smile. We went to the same school.
Yeah.
He goes his own way, I go my own way. But he's quite good. He's quite good. We talk. We good. He's okay. But I thought.
But he too was also a member of the Panther Party as well, wasn't he?
Of course, yes, he was a member of the Black Panthers, definitely, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously,
for those that don't know the significance of the Race Today t-shirt, Eddie, I don't know if you want to just say a little bit about Race Today.
No, please fill us in, because Race Today was so important.
Well, all I was going to say was that was a really fantastic political newspaper or newspaper publication, basically, that really spoke about the stories and experiences of Black people that was not getting reported in the mainstream media. So it was another kind of source, basically, for the Black communication who were really passionate about things that were happening, you know, particularly to do with race, to really talk to each other, network. And obviously, Linton was a supporter of the paper and had influence in that sense, but people like Darcus Howe and Layla Hussein Howe and others really contributed to that newspaper. So that's why this picture is kind of even more important, because it's giving us that little political context, even though he's having fun at the moment, which I believe that was at Carnival.
That's Carnival.
Yeah,
that's
Carnival. Yeah.
Carnival. And I think also the legacy of Carnival is how it speaks and how it's a representation of sort of the celebration of Black culture as it emerged in London. And even little details like, you know, Linton Kwesi's mate wearing a gold chain around his neck with the continent of Africa, the sort of the consciousness that started to grow in young people, because you were very young then, weren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it's a testament of photography and a little nuance that your particular archive has, which I hope we'll touch upon later, that we could suddenly look back on this work and get a sense of the power of it. I wanted to move on to the next slide as well. And I forgot my notes because this is about Race Today, and this was the Race Today offices, wasn't it?
This is not Race Today offices. This is West Indian World. It's another publication, but yeah. So West Indian World.
West Indian World, yeah.
You see, the reason why I got confused is because I see Barbara Bees is there on the right-hand side.
Yes. So what's happening in this photo? Well, their office was in Islington, wasn't it? So this is their Islington office, and this photo actually fact, it's actually been gifted, a copy of it been gifted to Islington Council now, because they want to make sure they preserve the history of this photo. But what you can see here is, this is like not one of my favorite photos, but it tells so much. So at the far end at the back, you've got Tony Douglas, the gentleman on the telephone. He works for the newspaper. Then you've got he's the assistant editor of the newspaper. Then you've got Russell Peer, as my dad points out, is the actual editor of the newspaper. Very important man whose name doesn't get mentioned much, but he was basically the person who pioneered this fantastic newspaper that, again, told the stories that weren't being told in mainstream media about Black people, about, you know, incidents that happened with the police, with housing, with, you know, to do with the economy. All of those things were reported in this newspaper. But what's interesting about the paper, the picture, is that the two ladies don't work for the West Indian World. They actually work for the Race Today newspaper, and they are journalists. This is journalists coming together from different publications, sharing stories because of key issues that brought them together. And what they're doing is both sets of journalists are writing stories for their own publications on the same topics. So this was something that would happen happened in the Black community at the time, where you get people from different organizations, groups, publications working together to make sure that you know, Black history is being documented, and also there was that collaboration. So the lady on the left is Layla Hussein, who's now Layla Darcus Howe's wife, Layla Hussein Howe, and the lady on the right is Barbara Bees. Yeah, do you want to say something? Because my dad likes it. At this point, talk about this photo. My dad always wants to say something. This is a private
conversation. We're not going to go there. I know what Neil's going to say. We're not going to go there. But this was off the record. This doesn't happen online. This happens offline.
The people and the ladies in the photo through Darcus Howe, and that's yeah. So this.
But can we move on to the next slide really quickly?
Eddie, sorry, before we move, my dad wanted to go back to that slide if you can.
Yes.
Okay.
No,
yeah, my dad wants to point out something.
No, Equiana is my hero, and he's in the photo.
Can you see if you look?
Can you see? There it is.
Yeah. So Equiano, again, another thing that is quite interesting about the photo is we can now see what inspired people like Russell Peer, and they were aware of people. Obviously, Equiano was a writer, and also Russell is a writer, and my dad absolutely loves the story of Equiano, is inspired by him, has his books. So when I was able to see this image in big format, I was like, oh my gosh, of course Equiano's in the picture. My dad's always talking about Equiano, and I know it's special to him. Yeah.
Can I break your hearts here? That particular portrait is not Equiano.
Oh my gosh, we thought it was Equiano.
No. Book. That's the cover of Equiano's book, but that is not Equiano.
Okay, yes. That's what, So we're talking about Equiano in the book, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's an amazing book, but really, this is why the next slide is so important. C.L.R. James's Black Jacobins.
Yes.
In his hand right there, and also the little pack of Pall Mall cigarettes in his top pocket's a nice touch. But the point is C.L.R. James, and I wanted to ask you, Neil, what was it like to have someone like C.L.R. James in your community speaking to you, because he's such a heavyweight in this world of writers?
Absolutely, you're right, but I have good relationship with people like that. C.L.R. James, we talk, we do what, I support him wherever he wants, take his photos, do that sort of stuff. So you know, people tend to like me for those things. Yeah.
Well, my dad's really comfortable around these type of people. I think that's what really
I can see that, because I've always seen him really comfortable around writers, creatives, musicians. You know, this probably leads on to his other projects in his life, which was like the radio station and everything else. But I felt how privilege it would be to have someone like C.L.R. James living on Railton Road, knowing that the Black Jacobins is almost like the baseline for understanding the context of where Black people. you know, in terms of where we come from, how we got here, and the politics behind it all. And again, to have these people in your midst, I thought was a beautiful thing. For me personally, growing up in Brixton, it was having someone like Darcus Howe, who I'd always bump into on Railton Road, and he would always have something to say, and it was always a beautiful thing. And I feel like we missed that in the community. But then I think to myself, Neil, you've become that. We had a group of students come round to the house just to talk to you about your experience. You've become these writers. How do you feel about that?
Well, I do my best, and open my mind to people, particularly Black people, and I'm always there to talk with them and support them, more important, and give them some ideas about how I work with this in this society and this country. And my family are not rich, but yet, you know, we use that power, that information to be successful.
Because it feels like the power and the information that you're speaking of is the truth, and it's a truth that's been hidden. It's like, I'm sure anyone who picks up that book that C.L.R. James has written will be shocked by what they learn from it. And in many respects, they're all facts. It's not a piece of fiction, it's a piece of fact. It's such a powerful thing to have. And I feel, and again, I just wanted to say, Neil, that your photography is almost like the 21st century equivalent of these writers. And how it went on to influence others. If we move on to the next slide, I think you'll see how the book and how words and writers became so powerful. So this would have been the Black Panther sort of headquarters off Railton Road. This would have been the same place John Berger, once he won that prize, again, another great writer, supported by giving his prize money to the Black Panthers, have a space for young people to learn about Black history, to have breakfast. Tell us about this experience. Tell us about this space, what it was like to be a part of this.
Oh, the Shakespeare Road was the headquarters of the Black Panthers, you know, in case you don't know. And we all goes there and do things and do meetings and talk and make sure we're on the right side of what's going on and so forth. Yeah, so that's what we were doing all that time. You know, Shakespeare Road is there.
It's the building's still there now. A lot of people don't know that that's where the location was, but this picture goes to show the kind of generational, I guess, connections between, you'd have family, you've had parents there, their children, you'd have people who were teenagers. Obviously my dad at the time was in. What about the actual meetings that would take place?
We would spend a lot of time on the Shakespeare Road. Shakespeare Road was the place. And then Olive Morris was also there. So we had a group of strong women that was around at the time.
Which also included Althea, and some, I'm sure we'll see some photos of there, but it was a real hub, not just for, people probably think the Panthers may have been in their 20s or 30s or particular age, but it was a place where people would come with families and extended, you know, the information to the actual community, which is why you can see a little child in the background there. With the picture just peeping by, you know? Yeah.
I mean, I found it shocking when Linton Kwesi Johnson, who's a great poet, said to me that he never knew that Black people had written books until he joined the Black Panthers and went into their library and saw books written by Black people. Like, that level of disconnect between your own culture as you emerge in this country that only the Black Panthers sort of solved by bringing you back together again must have been, I mean, as you know, Linton's gone on to become a great poet, but to think it was so, you could so nearly have missed this opportunity if it wasn't for this space and yourself as a photographer. So when we move on to the next slide, I was almost blown away when I found this in your archive, where you had been tasked to photograph the members card, to photograph pictures of members of the Black Panther Party at the time. And when you look at this, I could see, you know, Olive Morris, I could see Farouk Dondi, I could see ordinary people and Farouk's first wife, and is that you and yourself in there as well? And each member would have a different role to play. But it also showed me how wide a range of people were part of the Black Panther Party, in terms of ages, in terms of sexes, in terms of genders, and so on. And again, this comes back down to when Veronica said she went to a show at the 198 Gallery, because that was a time when we did the work in Brixton, where at Photo Fusion we had the portraits, and at the 198 Gallery we had the sort of activist work, the work that you were tasked to do. How that must have been where you sort of earned your chops, as it were, you know, out shooting every day, refining your skill as a photographer.
Yeah, but I didn't ask anyone for any money contribution. Because as a photographer, I can use my experience and print as much as I could do. And that's what I did, actually. So that's why I could have all these images that you're seeing, because they came through my system, because that's where I work and produce images and work with the various communities.
And something to mention also, talking about the prints that you did, my dad also worked in advertising. A lot of people don't know that he actually had a really kind of successful advertising career. So obviously it was the days where you had to kind of line up, you know, you say you line up the print, you know, literally doing the kind of manual printing process in advertising.
But it was really the backroom work, wasn't it? It was about laying the plates. It was about
exactly.
Plates, right? It wasn't frontline. You wasn't shooting.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Actually, physically laying.
You have the fixer. Exactly. You know the fixer. We have the fixer.
Exactly. Yeah.
the fixer, right? That's like the worst job in advertising right now, if I remember rightly. The amount of chemicals you have to deal with wasn't right, but I'm not saying anymore.
Yeah. So all of these kind of skills, he was some people were just photographers, but he was actually really involved in the entire printing process, not just in like newspaper publishing, but also advertising, and you know, a kind of real range of different companies. So he worked for Saatchi and Saatchi. He worked for you know, local community groups, just doing all around London, and obviously doing photography all around the country and parts of the world too. Yeah.
Absolutely. But really, after hours, you would be doing your social work for the community. This is where you'd make prints and create, you then supply to the different newspapers. And also, although we haven't shown any of these images here, but if someone would have been, for example, beaten shitless by the police, you'd be there to photograph them to help support their case.
Fantastic. Exactly what you're saying. The moment the police see me and my camera, they calm down seriously and walk away.
Yeah. And
they don't want to push it too far.
No, and it still points to the power of the camera, doesn't it? So when we move on to the next slide, and you know, again, it's part of these members shots that Neil would take for the Panther Party, which is such a beautiful touch. We see Alfie Quant, who in the Small Axe film by Steve McQueen was played by Letitia Wright. And if we move on to the next slide, we see sort of a contact sheet of Althea giving a speech outside the Mangrove restaurant in West London. Now, I kind of find it interesting how the Small Axe film borrowed so heavily from your photography, because some of the angles in the film are just shot for shot exactly what you created. And I don't know if you've seen the film, but I feel like sometimes when I watched Small Axe, I was quite frustrated by how it looked quite small and quite insular. But when you see your photographs, you're like, wow, this is a movement in West London. And your photography tells the truth, whereas the BBC is a fictionalized event.
Well, I just wanted to add to that. So what's happened is my dad's images have been due to different exhibitions over the years, and people sharing his images on social media, there are now like thousands of his images, which are, some of them are the same image over and over, but they're on the internet. And what happens is a lot of producers who make documentaries about you know, some of these real life events and people like Althea, etc. They use his images as mood boards to really kind of set the scene for how their production would actually, you know, even things like hairstyles, the settings, just the whole kind of experience at the time. So we actually work quite closely with a lot of film producers and have like really, I guess, use the images to make sure that some of what you're seeing is as close as possible to kind of recreate, because obviously it's really difficult to recreate exactly what happened at the time. So something, a documentary like The Small Axe, which obviously we were able to watch The Small Axe. And then, you know, I was really kind of pleased to at least hear the Mangrove 9 story being told, which was my dad really enjoyed the fact that, you know, Darcus's story and everybody, you know, part of that, their stories were being told. So I think the good thing, like you said, my dad's images told the truth because it captured actually what happened. But I guess all you can do is try to get as much information out of the images and then create TV programs out of that, which has happened many times.
Can I say what upset me the most was there was a cutaway shot of a photographer, literally, I think it was like meant to be Neil, but it wasn't. And he had a Nikon camera. And I knew for a fact they got the camera wrong because Neil did not have a Nikon. You had a Pentax LX, is that right?
Yeah, originally a Pentax.
Yeah, but you also had Nikon as well, though.
Nikon was way back.
Yeah.
Nikon's when you have money, you have a Nikon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When your dad lends you money, you buy a Pentax. It's kind of the details that I absolutely love, but I think it's a testament to photography. And then I wanted to move on to the next set of slides because really this is the point at which these are the most almost bootlegged work of yours, where you are there on the front line, a young man photographing these things happen. And I think I just wanted to sort of rest on some of these and move on to the next slide as well. You know, Neil, if you could tell us what it's like to be on that march. Sorry, if you can go back.
Well, I think that was one of those march out of London into, like, you know,
Up the north somewhere.
North, yeah, either Manchester.
You were all over the country documenting these.
All over the country, yeah. Manchester, this place, everywhere we went, we march and talk and explain to people and expose, you know, what was happening in Birmingham, in Manchester, the way Black people were being treated. We marching with groups of people, many people. You can see from the images, many people were there. And we have our badges, and we did, and we show strength.
And I think one of the important stories that you taught me was that it's about solidarity as well, because it's one thing growing up in Nottingham, being a small Black community, being beaten upon, just to feel like, oh, here comes Brixton, here comes West London, we're going to walk with you. And then you documented these movements as they happen. I think that's an important part of the journey to sort of to take away the discrimination that was rife within British society. And as we move on to that, and really it's one of the key touch points is this moment. This is post the Brixton riots, I take it. So all the protests, everything that you stood for, to a certain extent, you may argue it was to no avail. It was only until Brixton burnt down before the government started listening. Is that true?
Well, this picture was taken in Brixton. Yeah, Roy Jenkins. So this is Lord Roy Jenkins, who wrote the famous Jenkins report. He's a gentleman with the glasses. Sitting beside him is Courtney Laws, who it was one of the most prolific community leaders in South London. He was also one of the key people when it came to making sure Black people received enough housing, because there was a lot of racism at the time in terms of trying to rent properties, etc. And there was a lot of economic struggle within the community. So the Home Secretary, Jenkins, he came to Brixton to have this meeting urgently with Mr. Laws, because Mr. Laws had been one of the key campaigners asking for government to make changes to what was happening with the inequality with Black people. So just to set the date, this was taken this is taken after the the changes to the Discrimination Act. So you had the first Discrimination Act in 1965, and that was the first time in this country that it was illegal to mistreat people due to anything to do with with discrimination. So after this meeting, Roy Jenkins did a report, and he then kind of edited the Discrimination Act, which was due to the campaigning of the Black Panthers, not just the Black Panthers, but all of the other anti-racism groups that was around at the time. And a lot of that was led by the conversations that Courtney Laws had with the government at the time. So this picture is really instrumental because Home Secretary hasn't been to Brixton since. My dad always mentions that. It was really, really important. And then after that, it led, a couple of years later, led to the Jenkins Report, which was the first ever investigation into racism in Britain, which was a landmark report.
All because of my camera.
Well,
no, at all.
Yeah.
So, I was just wanting to jump onto the next slide to see where that takes us. And again, it's just back down to activism. It's a beautiful portrait of Liz Obi, I think, yes. And Olive Morris. Olive is a legend in Brixton because she was on the front line. She was a warrior. And certainly her contribution, this is something that's never really said enough, I don't think, is that the legacies of the Black Panthers wasn't necessarily just, racial inequality, but it was also housing. And more importantly, I think the long-term effect of it was the housing associations that we have to this day, that the template was set in Brixton by Olive Morris. Go in, squat a building, refurbish the building, rent it out to families. Now, give us the context of what Brixton was like and give us the context of what Olive Morris did.
Oh,
she was amazing, wasn't she?
Oh, yeah. Olive was our good friend. We worked together. She's strong, she's determined. There was a big house near Shakespeare Road, and she decided that she's going to live there. And she did. And then later on, she decided not to leave the building, and she came down in the building, and
she actually climbed up on top of the roof.
To the roof, and
there was like 100 police officers trying to get her, and they wanted her because she was part of the squatters' rights campaign groups as well as the women's rights groups, anti-racism groups, and she was top of it in the building. The picture you're seeing here is actually when she got inside the building. And she would only want a few people to come in there. My dad was one of those, and that's how this picture was taken. So there was like right now, as we're looking at her, there was like loads of police outside, and it was a big kind of thing. And she's there, smoking a cigarette, as you can see, looking very chilled while there's lots of drama and chaos. Because she was very fearless. She just to say a bit more about Olive. One of the reasons why she was so prolific, well, for a start, sadly, she died at a very young age. She was 27, I think it was. She was under 30 when she passed away. She had an illness, and well, not quite random. My dad was actually at the hospital when she died because I was actually being born. So the day I was born, my mum was having me in the hospital when Olive Morris was sick upstairs in the same hospital. So my parents were able to see her just before she died. And obviously they were friends of her. But before she died, she traveled many parts of the world, including China. My dad always talks about that. She basically wanted to bring people together and really get rid of inequality for everybody in all walks of society. But this photo is actually now, my dad's gifted it to the National Portrait Gallery, and the National Portrait Gallery has listed her as one of Britain's 100 most important women in British history, and they've made a book and she's featured in there. So she's really a special person. And also in Brixton, there's a building that's named after her called Olive Morris House.
Yeah, but I think her story hasn't truly been told. Powerful woman, and yeah, we wait for that film to happen. So I think moving to the next slide, and yes, Neil, this particular day. Obviously, this is the contact sheet for that is one of your most famous and iconic images of and we'll sort of get to the background of this particular shot. But I think what struck me as really interesting was that on one particular day, these racists came into Brixton, sprayed up this door, burnt down the record shop, and literally they sort of left almost a path of different Black-owned businesses that they tried to destroy. And then you documented the aftermath of this. So please tell us about this day, you know.
Well, I was in Brixton, as usual, and they say, well, you know, the racist people have graffiti the house in Balham.
The office.
The office in Balham. So I got there and I had to decide how to photograph it. So the lady, you can see how perfect she is, and she looked very good and so forth. So I took a photograph, but I thought, if I were to take a photograph and she's not there, then people would say it's a lie, it's not true. So eventually I convinced her to photograph me, to allow me to photograph her. And she did. And I said, look, point at the door. Because all the racist people around Balham had already left for lunch. And she agreed that she would help me out. So I said, okay. So I took the picture of her. And that's one of the most important photographs I've taken. You know, talk about keep Britain white and all these other nonsense. But anyway, it works well, and it's still working well for us. Emilia may want to say a word on that.
Well, just to give a little background, the actual building that this was, the graffiti has been, well, the building basically it's called International Personnel, which was a company, well, it was like a community organization that gave training to Black women, because at the time, my dad always talks about this, that, you know, Black women were not given many opportunities to work in offices and, you know, certain industries. So one of the kind of key members of the Black Panthers called David Udo started a foundation, and that foundation ran basically through this organization. So it was actually called the Martin Luther King Foundation, and they set up the International Personnel Building, which had this training scheme for Black women. So at the time in Balham, you know, obviously people in that community weren't happy that there were Black people doing training and, you know, in the area. So that was actually, this event was part of a series of activities during that time where Black businesses, Black, you know, organizations were targeted either through firebombs, through graffiti, through all kinds of, situations.
Exactly. And it seems like it was done on literally on the same day. Like, so someone got in a car and just went all the way down from what felt like sort of Surrey ends, Balham, Clapham, Brixton, and so on. And whatever, losers. So this was a record shop that obviously got firebombed as well in Brixton. And
but
then
this actually, there was a car. This was, you know, you mentioned the car. This is actually when the car drove into the front of the building. So yeah, my dad's got, obviously there's more images on that negative that you sees the car and everything. So this, again, like you said, Eddie, was part of a series of incidents that were happening. The thing is, they were happening all over the UK. But this was obviously, this picture was actually taken in Brixton at the really popular record shop, which was like a hub of the community. This photo, the gentleman with the afro, he basically, we've had a chance to speak to him, and he's shared his experience on what happened that day. He's still, you know, very, very distressing, very awful kind of memory. But yeah, he was actually featured in a BBC documentary talking about racism at the time.
Yeah, and how it was so violent, you know. And so when we go to the next slide, we're going to see Farouk Dondi, who also was he unfortunately suffered in this attack as well, didn't he? Because the building he was in, which was the paper that he was running on Brixton, was firebombed, and he had to jump out the window, and then managed to break both his legs in the process. But Farouk was a lawyer, and again, this is something that's for your dad, really. But I know you know the story as well. Is how Farouk supported the community in terms of legal representation, and it's not, people like Darcus Howe trained in law. Much of the battle was on the front line with racists throwing firebombs and defending himself, as well as in the courts, as well as with the police. It was like a battle against all these different forces, and essentially, common sense won over the day. So I just wanted to point out Farouk and his contribution to the story as well. And on to the next slide, really.
Say just on Farouk that what a lot you see it sometimes in articles, but there was a real there was a lot of different people from different backgrounds who were part of this movement. So you have people who were from different Caribbean islands, people from South Asia, people from Africa. A lot of people don't realize that not just members of the Black Panthers, but also the other groups that were out there fighting for equality were, a real kind of united front. It was quite amazing, actually.
Absolutely, and it felt like sort of injustice was on so many levels, from housing to jobs to sexual discrimination. The battle, and so what happened was it felt like there was a real group of people coming together to really overturn a society that really sort of been left to rot. So I'm not sure how it works, but I feel like we've come to that point where we may have to open the floor to questions and that sort of thing. If we move on to the next slide, I'm not sure if I had a slide to end on, but it was pretty much again, talk about inequality. That policeman in the corner there looks like a child. Anyway. A child in a uniform, like really dragging one woman off, and Neil tells his story so well. It was so unnecessary. It was almost like a joke to these policemen, and her protest was almost devalued because of who she was. But I do believe, am I right in saying this? That it's question time, right?
Yeah. Okay. What we'll do now is, can I just give you one more photo that you might like to talk about? Because here, Darcus
Mr. Howe.
Yeah. If you could just give us some talk about Mr. Howe himself and how important he was to the Black British Panther Party, and also putting out the story and experiences of Black Britain at that time. Would you be able to add anything else to that? Sorry.
Oh, do you want to say a bit about Darcus? You're a friend of yours, wasn't he?
Darcus Howe, yes, he's a great guy, as far as I know. We worked together. We went around the country. We marched. We talked. I mean, he came from a good family in the Caribbean.
Exactly.
And
very educated.
Yeah, well educated, and he's strong and determined. And we worked together, and we was inspired.
Because he was CLR James's nephew, wasn't he?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing about sort of that time, is that they really underestimated the people. And to quote Darcus Howe, he said they thought we were just a bunch of Negroes, without any understanding of the levels of education, of what they've been through to come to this island to support what was essentially the post-war recovery.
Again, my dad.
Sorry, go on, please, Amelia.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, my dad always talks about how when at the time there were like a group of young people who were like the Darcus Howe and the Altheas and others who were really highly educated, and a lot of that was during the Black Panthers. They'd be sharing their education with others. So say someone like my dad who didn't go to university and hadn't had that same kind of educational background, it was about those people like Darcus really sharing their knowledge and also opening up people's mind to you know, different ideas and looking at the world in a different way, because they had come, and a lot of them had come to the UK older. So, you know, someone like my dad came when he was 12. Someone may have come when they were 16 or 20. And they'd spend a lot of time in different community centres. So there was a famous West Indian Student Union. Yeah. So they used to, yes, where Ansel Wong, so we mentioned Ansel Wong earlier. So he used to, you know, be one of those, you know, real key figures, you know, bringing people together. And a lot of that was a lot of intellectual conversation, a lot of ideas and learning would happen, which was really important, because you've got different people from different backgrounds and classes and educational experiences. It's like a melting pot.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to mention, because I think Darkus gets a lot of, he gets seen as like some kind of leader, but it's really Althea LeQuant was the leader.
Yep.
Darkus, I feel like Darkus was the number 2 and Althea was the number 1 in this regard.
But, yeah, and you know, it depends on what year, what time, and what occasion you're looking at. So, you know, if, like, for example, my dad would say there were points where Olive Morris would be marching barefoot, leading, and, you know, doing certain strategies. Then it would be Althea for different purposes. Then you've got, you know, so I think, and then there were other members of the group. So, it's so interesting. Yeah,
it really is interesting how time perceives things, but ultimately your photographs are there as a testament to what there is. And I've obviously had the luxury of going through the contact sheets and seeing nuances that are beyond that. And I wanted to come back to this point about the archive, particularly because now, that's in your hands. This archive, these images that will have to be, you know, they have to be there in some way, shape, or form for the true narrative of 20th century Britain.
Yeah. What I'm doing is basically on a daily basis anyway, making sure that the public get access to the archive. So things like I've created education packs for schools. Lots of university students, college students, do a lot of research with the images as part of their dissertations and studies. A lot of authors have used the images in their books to make sure that those stories in really niche areas are told. So it's, you know, that's the kind of role of the archive at the moment. But aside from that, what we've discussed today, a lot of that has been around racism and about the Black Panthers, but his archive is actually probably one of the most versatile Black archives, because he's, as I said, he is a socialite. He has the most fun party, concerts. He's done so many things, including, you know, met some of the most interesting musicians, artists, models, etc. So his archive is, there's a lot to see. But I know Veronica probably has some questions that she needs to get to.
Exactly, but I still want to say one thing.
Yeah, please do, go for it.
Niels Fela Kute's story still to me is gold, absolute gold, and that's another chapter that we'll get to. But I'm going to sit on this archive and hopefully be a part of a way to engineer how we hear Niels' Nigeria years.
Oh my gosh!
Which is
that?
Another book.
Yeah,
you don't want to come?
Oh, I'm already. Yeah, I'm there. 6 months. You know, we'll just do a tour, Neil. Come on, me, you, the rest of the boys, Charlie.
For those that don't know, my dad spent the last 40 years traveling back and forth to Nigeria practically every year. So part of that is, you know, he's got archive on that as well, but he's got really close ties with Africa. But Veronica, over to you.
Yeah, hi. What I was going to say now, this is brilliant. It really was just fantastic to, you know, just hear the conversation flowing, to hear, you know, things that it was just amazing to me, just to hear how things were knitted together and how important really your father's work is to, in terms of being a documentarian of that period of time. And that's one of the things, one of the things I wanted to ask, because just to let you know, those of you who've joined in, please use the chat to write down some questions that we can hopefully answer this evening. But one of the things I just wanted to ask was, and I think maybe it's already been answered by you, Neil, but when you were taking your photographs especially as time went on, did you realize at any point that you, in a way, were capturing time? You're capturing aspects of time that would later on act as part of your legacy, as part of your archive. And then the next question I'd like to ask is about the one about the role of women, because it's really interesting. The comment was made that Darcus Howe might be seen as, you know, one of the main people in the Black British Panther Party, but there's actually the women behind it. So, you know, for example, like Olive Morris, who had the, you know, the building actually in Brixton was taken down by the council just recently. They've built some flats there actually.
Yeah.
And yeah, and also, you know, Althea LaQuant. So if you could answer those two questions about the idea of, you know, recognizing as you were taking your photographs as time went on that actually you were capturing time, and then the role of women. So that'd be really brilliant if you can. Thank you.
So did you think the archive would be this important? Is what they want to know. Because you were going to throw them away at one point.
No.
Or who was going to be there in the garage?
Yeah, there might be somewhere, but my photography is too important for me to throw away. I know the value of what it is.
Yeah.
That's why I'm always hold on to these things. Always. My problem is that I don't have enough space.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, fortunately, my daughter has been doing a really good job for me.
Yeah.
Difficult for somebody like me who's spending a whole amount of time and images and pictures and this and that, but I still have to make sure that it's there for the future. And images, photograph, are so important because as some of you rightly said, when the police see that, they step back.
Yeah.
They don't come in and trouble you, you know?
But
so
did you think they were going to be this important though? Because you always say, he always says, I can't believe people are so interested in these pictures. Because you didn't know that there'd be in museums and galleries and newspapers like this.
Yes, but we know that it's important. And not everybody see it as important, but some people see it. And the fact that I have it and it's there, that we can expose it. And that's what we're trying to do, to make sure that people can see it and respond to it. And quite a lot of stories, like the Keep Britain White and all those stuff.
There's loads of those. Also, in terms of the women, so how important were women in Black Panthers? Because you always say that the women were strong.
Of course, they're strong, determined, and they are part of it. I mean, there are many people that are extremely strong, and you know, they do get involved on it too, and they look after things and make sure that it works. So that's what we learn.
Yeah. So basically, they were the glue. They were the ones. Were they the ones who basically made things work? They realized things. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So just going to the chat now. There are a couple of questions here. So Stuart Taylor has asked, does Neil consider the American social documentary photographer Gordon Parks to be a contemporary? Did you ever meet Gordon Parks?
No, I've heard his name many times, but I haven't met him.
No, but obviously his work is amazing. But their paths didn't cross. No. But but we are obviously, as due to technology, the last few years he's made a lot of new connections with like American museums and just like, you know, even the new African American Museum in Washington. But not particularly Gordon, but definitely his work is amazing.
Yeah, great. And here's another one from Ravina. For Neil, did you ever have moments that made it difficult to keep going and document these important moments? What kept you going?
What determined to make sure that it comes? Because I think sometimes some of the images that people make wasn't that strong. And I always make sure that it's work, it's there. And I don't want to see a face, black face. I'll use the images and make sure that it's properly printed and all those stuff.
He's a perfectionist when it came to the print.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's always talking about the image must be clear, the focus, the, you know, black people's faces in images at the time.
I can't take that when I see black people.
He doesn't like it. He wants even now when we're doing like this Zoom, he's like, is the quality clear? It's so it's not clear enough. I'm like, it's just my laptop, but he's very so very particular. So that kept him going. He always wanted to show black people looking good.
Yeah, and especially at a time when black people, you know, specifically weren't being shown in a particular light, weren't being shown to be good. You know, if our faces were fuzzed out, it really didn't matter to some people. So to bring that to light and to really clarify us was an important thing, both, you know, literally as well as metaphorically. So this question is for Amelia. How has your dad's life and position in the movement influenced your life trajectory, your values?
Well, huge influence. Sometimes it's difficult to maybe even separate my own kind of values and my own kind of direction in life, because so much of that is led by my dad's work and what he's done, and also the impact that he's had on other people. So part of probably the reason why I help with the archive is because it's something that is very important to me, because it's important to him. And it's completely, I mean, completely changed everything. Even my dad's also mentioned the other people who were the photographers at the time. So he basically had a group of friends who he trained as photographers, and the same kind of influence that he's had on me, he's had on his close friends as well. So when you're around him in his close circles, it's, you know, his influence is quite infectious, and that's probably because a lot of things that he's done has been really essential for the black community. So that's influenced me as well.
Yeah, great. Okay.
And I take good photos like the one with
the Bailey sisters.
The Bailey sisters one and others.
What did they ask?
Yes. And the Bailey sisters, remembers the one that was on the cover of Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other. That's where that came out. It was amazing. Here's another question from Jay. The British Black Panthers is central to how we talk about civil rights in the UK. So what stories of racial injustice, justice from the past, would you like to see come to the surface over the next few years?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, it says the British Black Panthers is central to how we talk about civil rights in the UK. So what stories of racial justice, injustice from the past would you like to see come to the surface over the next few years? Perhaps an image, perhaps something that you might have photographed or might be in the archive that you think, you know, this deserves coming back to the light, or was in the light.
So basically the pictures that you have, what stories are in there that are about racism that you want people to see. He's got a lot. Do you know what? There are, so because he was the photographer for the Black Panthers, and separately the photographer for for lots of different publications, and for himself as well. He's got lots of stories that haven't been told about police brutality, about you know, you've even got those images of no blacks, no Irish, you know, that there's many stories. So I think there's probably too many to say in particular, but he does have a few that are quite interesting and can really tell a lot about the social landscape at the time, which in the future he definitely will give public access to.
Can I bring back? I know there's some more questions, but just to talk about make mention of Neil's book, which we'll put in the chat. Expectations: The Untold Story of Black Community Leaders in the 1960s, and 70s. It's paperback, which can be got from Amazon. So just to talk about that book, are any of the things, any of the images, or any of the stories or people that we might not necessarily know that might have been buried, which might be talked about in that book?
Yeah. Sorry, what was the last bit of your question? Anyone in the book
that might be buried that you hope will come back to the fore again?
Oh,
book,
So in terms of that book, what my dad wanted to do was he's had this idea since, I don't know, like 2015 or before that, where he wanted to tell the story of Black community leaders and their expectations coming to Britain in the 60s, or post-Windrush, basically. So I took a selection of those stories and put them in his book, which is his first solo book that he's published. So we self-published it with the Heritage Lottery Fund. And there's a gentleman in there called David Udo, who I mentioned earlier. And he was someone that my dad mentioned, that you guys traveled all up and down the country. And the Black Panther. And in the picture in the book, David Udo's at a community meeting, but there's other images of David at meetings around like commerce, because there was like, you know, you get groups in society who were like Caribbean community groups who would give loans to businesses because Black businesses were having trouble getting money from ordinary banks. So people like David Udo and the things that he's done, he's still alive, which is great. He's in Nigeria at the moment, but someone like that is, his story, I've never heard of him before looking at the archive and doing the research.
That's really important. And just to say that, coming back to a comment about our archive at Goldsmiths, it was wonderful to hear this from Leslie Ruthven, who is head of the archive at Goldsmiths. Wonderful to hear about the Race Today from your perspectives. Thank you. There are 18 issues of Race Today, not a full run, in special collections and archives at Goldsmiths. And the collections are open to everyone once COVID-19 restrictions are lifted. But I just want to jump down to this question. Neil, and this for Neil, are you still using your camera today? And if so, what has caught your eye?
Oh, to be fair, the fact is that I hardly use the camera at the moment.
Let me jump in on that. Sorry, Neil, entirely true. A few months ago, we went to see James Barner with Charlie Phillips, and you did bring your Nikon out of retirement for that.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So there are occasions when you do bring the camera out, but I suspect you haven't processed that roll of film.
No, I thought you guys would be in the photo.
Yeah.
He actually he did go to a couple of marches at some point recently, which will be quite interesting. At some point, because what happened with the images that you've seen, all these most of them black and white images, he took them when he was young and put down the camera officially many years, for like, how many years? 30, 40 years? Yeah. So he wasn't an official photographer. He went into publishing and other things. So now it's more occasionally he would pick it up, because he's been kind of too busy doing other stuff, but he still has a passion for the camera and he does occasionally pick it up. Yeah.
Okay, so this kind of leads nicely into the question.
Oh, he said he still remembers the camera.
Still remembers the camera. Okay.
Yeah, and his pictures, I couldn't believe it. They're really good still. I was shocked. Yeah.
That's really good. So this leads us really nicely into a question from Ravina for Neil. So do you have any advice for current or future Black photographers in Britain? Do you have any advice for them?
It's a simple one: determine and be honest, and have some sort of determination, something in your head what you want to achieve. You want positive images. And that's what I do. I want positive strength in my images. I don't want weakness there. I need strength and determination.
Yeah. Great question. And just, I think one of these questions, if you wouldn't mind, Neil, you were an entrepreneur. I mean, you were one of the co-founders of Choice FM. Could you talk a little bit about some of your experiences in publishing and in radio? Just, because you seem to be almost like Renaissance man with all the things that you've done. So, if you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, publishing wasn't something that I thought about. It's as time goes on and things happening in photography and newspapers, Times, and all these places that have been going around, open up my head and make sure that I can do things. And that's how it really comes. Yeah.
He published Root magazine in 1979 or around late 70s. And then that was the first glossy kind of, think of like a Black Ebony or Black Vogue magazine, but still quite political. And then after that, we did Choice FM, the radio station, and that was quite a few years. So he was, for those that don't know, he was the sales director. So at Choice FM, he was the man who focused on the revenue. And like you said, he's very entrepreneurial. That's always been his thing. Because he's an artist, but he's also has that kind of commercial mind.
Commercial mind, yeah. Okay, that's great. And I just want to let, someone's asked, will the recording be available after the talk? And yes, it will be. And we'll let all participants know where they can find it. And someone who said that they've had, just if we can ask this final question, could Neil, would Eddie and Neil compare, I'm wondering if Eddie and Neil could compare and contrast experiences of developing a personal photographic practice and style? In the last few minutes, if that's probably a massive question. But
it's a massive question.
Yeah.
My style is like, I shoot rappers. I shoot, it's impossible. I became politically aware of photography once I met Neil, and that influenced my photography.
No, I'm going to send you an invoice.
Sorry?
I'm going to send you an invoice.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I do owe a lot to you, Neil, let's be honest. But I thought we take care of each other, I'll hook you up sometimes, So, but it's hard to compare with such different generations. And I feel if I had grown up in the time of Neil, I would have been, I just don't know. But that said, this is the thing about Neil's work. Neil's work is quite wide, where his portraits of Bob Marley, Marvin Gaye, Fela Kuti, that would have been closer to my heart and closer to my style of photography. But then Neil went further, went into society, into the community, into things that you don't get paid to do. And I think that's where the inspiration comes from, where it's like, I need to go back. And that's why I've started documenting Neil and Charlie and James Barner and other photographers of the 20th century, to at least have some kind of sense that photography shouldn't just be a job. It should be historical. It should have no value at the time of taking it, but value 20 years later. That's what I've learned from Neil.
Okay.
More than anything.
Okay.
Well done.
Well, thanks, Neil. Thanks, Neil. I got you, Neil. I got your back. Yeah. And thank you, Amelia, as well. Thank you. Just so nice to hear it's so nice to hear your take on it. I know you're there in the background, but it's good to see you side by side. Father and daughter representing, doing it, doing it big.
It was a good discussion. You brought some really interesting points, Eddie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, man, there's so many untold stories, aren't there? Like every picture is an untold story. And even today, like looking at the picture of Linton Kwesi Johnson and seeing his T-shirt and looking at the people behind him, I'm like, that's a whole thing in itself. It's a whole world in itself. And I can't stress it enough. The Nigeria years. Oh my God. I cannot wait till we get that out on road, because that's going to be mind blowing. And also, Neil, can I ask you a question? So when it comes to that biopic film where, who's going to play Neil Kenlock? Like, I'm thinking, we've got Letitia Wright playing Althea LaQuant, which I thought was great casting. Who's going to play Neil?
Which actor?
I'm sure we did that.
Well, someone tried to do that.
Remember? I know.
Hold on.
That situation didn't happen to us, but we.
Hold on.
I think if you what we'll do, so Amelia, I think this is also another conversation that can go on off screen. Who's going to play whom? I just want to end with this, fantastic shot. That think, Eddie, did you take this?
Indeed, from our little road trip. Every now and then, Neil takes me out on a training day thing. I don't know if you know the film Training Day, but I usually sit in the front seat of the car. Neil's driving. We go out on the road. We see some other photographers, and this is part of my document of him on that day. And I feel honored and blessed to be a student of Mr. Kenlock.
Fantastic. Thank you. I just want to say thank you. I think we're going to have to end here. It's just more or less spot on time. I just want to say thank you so much to Neil for taking part of this, and Amelia as well alongside, and obviously Eddie for doing your, sterling work and, taking us through, just the tip of the iceberg of what it is that Neil has managed to preserve. Just, those little snapshots, which was so important, as we realized. For example, when Amelia, you talked about how your dad's work was called on, for example, when at the trial of the Mangrove 9, things like that. That would be lost if you hadn't kept up his archive and not keeping up his archive. So I just want to let people know that this evening will be recorded and the links will be sent out to you. We will also send you out a questionnaire just to ask you, questions about the evening and what you would also like to see from the CISJ in the future. And also just to let you know, just to look out for the work by Eddie, because we will give you a link to his work in the questionnaire that we send out, but also the book by Neil. So so there's Eddie putting up his work there.
That's my book that will be coming out this year. I've got 2 books on junglist music. This one being Junglist, and Who Say Reload, which again is about jungle music. And again, Neil was there with Choice FM representing for the culture, but that's my little plug. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay.
And thanks to you, Veronica, and your team as well. Thank you for having us. And my dad, really, he's been looking forward to this for a long time.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you just stayed with it, because COVID got in the way, and that was, your dad's talking about strength of mind. That was it. And also, don't forget, as I said, the book by Neil, Expectations: The Untold Story of Black Community Leaders in the 1960s and 1970s, paperback. And also, we'll give you a link to Kenlock photography, so you can see his work again online. So I just want to say thank you again. Sorry, Fazana, did you want to say something as well?
Thank you so much, Neil, Eddie, Amelia, and also Veronica. It's been a fantastic event, and thank you to everybody who came and joined in the conversation. As Veronica said, we'll send you a feedback form, and you can, if you didn't get to ask a question, you'll be able to post a question via that form, and our speakers have really kindly said they'll be willing to carry on the conversation. We'll find a way to do that. So thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so good night to you all, and thank you again for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'm going to walk out a shot.